So you want to get into stablecoins to protect yourself from the downside volatility of the bear market, but you don't want one of those old USDC or Tether centralized coins. You want your stablecoin to be decentralized and Web3. Well, you're in luck, because today I'm talking about DAI. Now, a lot of people call DAI a decentralized stablecoin, and although that may have been true at the beginning, it's increasingly no longer so. It's starting to look a lot more like USDC and BUSD with some notable advantages. And this trend towards centralization is something that has been the source of quite a bit of intrigue and drama in the recent past in the MakerDAO community. But this is a review, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. Instead, I'm going to save that for my next video, which will be a deep dive into the battle for DAI and MakerDAO's soul. So like the video, subscribe, click the bell notification if you want to be notified when that video comes out. But today we're just talking about how does DAI work, how do you get it, how do you use it, and what are the risks of allocating some of your portfolio to DAI. But let's dive into how it works. Now, if you've been around crypto for a little while, you may already be familiar at a high level with what DAI is, that it's made up of vaults where you can lock up collateral and you can issue DAI. And so I'm going to break it down into 3 basic components and 2 basic parameters. Basically, the MakerDAO system that produces DAI, the stablecoin, is made up of 3 components: the vaults, the oracles, and the auction. Now, a vault is where someone might come along and lock up collateral. So let's say they lock up $150 worth of ETH. They would then be able to print around $100 worth of DAI. This is the functional equivalent of taking out a loan against your crypto collateral, but that loan has to be over collateralized. So like when you buy a house, for instance, you put down a down payment, which is a small percentage of the overall loan, and then the remainder of the collateral for the loan is the house itself. And as you pay down the debt of your mortgage, you get more equity in your house. Now, the same is true of a Maker vault. You would deposit Ethereum, which would become the collateral, and instead of being under collateralized like a mortgage, it's over collateralized to maintain the stability of the system. Which brings in the next component, which is oracles. Now, these are price feeds that tell the Maker system what the price of the underlying collateral is. If the price of Ethereum dips too low, then the system needs to be able to make a decision on how to liquidate that vault. If the Ethereum price goes up, it needs to be able to say, okay, you can now print more DAI. Which leads to the third component, which is the automated auction system.
Sold $1,000!
So you can create a collateralized debt position. That collateralized debt position is informed by an oracle as to what the price of your underlying collateral is, and if it drops too low, then it triggers an automatic auction, which you can think of as like a margin call functionally. The underlying collateral is sold at auction for a bit of a discount, and then that DAI is reclaimed and paid back into the system, keeping the whole thing solvent. Now, that's how the system works at a high level, how DAI is printed and how the system is recollateralized in the event of the underlying collateral going down in value. But there are 2 parameters that we have to talk about that are a part of each specific Maker vault. There is the stability fee, or the interest rate, and then there is the collateralization ratio. So the stability fee is basically the cost of taking out a loan denominated in DAI. And if you want, you can go over to oasis.app and take a look at the different annual fees that they say they have. This is what the stability fee is, and so you can see that it's 0.5% for Ethereum, it's 0.75% for wrapped Bitcoin, it's 0.75% for staked ETH. Now, these stability fees are not hard-coded in the system. Neither is the collateralization ratio. You can see that with Ethereum, it's 170% collateralization ratio, which means that in order to print $100 worth of DAI, you need to deposit at least $170 worth of Ethereum. But the collateralization ratio is not the same across different collateral types. So Bitcoin requires a higher collateralization ratio, and staked ETH requires an even larger collateralization ratio. These are not hard-coded within the system, they're decided by governance votes, which introduces the next important concept in this mechanism design, which is the MKR token, which is the governance token of the system. And the governance token only has so much power over the system state itself. Specifically, there's executive votes that go on each week that augment the collateralization ratios as well as the stability fees of the system overall. And that's just one of the two kinds of votes that take place in the Maker ecosystem. MakerDAO also has governance votes, which are a little bit more strategic and long-term, and that is actually where a lot of the drama comes into play, and I will get more into that in the next video, as I mentioned at the beginning. Suffice to say, there are these three components, which are governed by these two parameters, which are themselves governed by the Maker governors, or the holders of the MKR token. And the holders of the MKR token and the core units within the MakerDAO are the ones that decide these collateralization ratios as well as these interest rates, and they decide them differently for different types of collateral. So it used to be that there was only single collateral DAI, and that was when ETH that was allowed to mint DAI. Then it moved to multi-collateral DAI. They started incorporating things like wrapped Bitcoin. Then during the flash crash of March 2020, they realized they need more stable collateral, which is when they started integrating USDC. And now USDC actually makes up the majority of the collateralized debt positions within the MakerDAO system. And recently, they've been moving to take on real-world assets. So banks holding things like treasury bills and short-term corporate debt are now going to be able to issue DAI against the collateral that they're holding in custody for the MakerDAO system. That move was not decided by executive vote, but instead by a governance poll, where the MakerDAO community decided that they wanted to be a little bit more regulatory focused and they wanted to move to integrate with the traditional financial system rather than fully fight against it, which again has caused some consternation among MakerDAO users. Some people are not too happy about this idea to be a little bit more centralized and a little bit less decentralized, but hey, it's still permissionless, and the system continues to work and be stable. So it's hard to say whether or not that was a poor decision. Either way, I'll get more into it in the next video. So let's move on to how do you get DAI? Well, you can print it yourself if you want to go to oasis.app and open your own vault, which allows you to take a long ETH position or a long Bitcoin position if you want to, but you can also get it from most major exchanges, Coinbase, Binance, Gemini, so on and so forth, as well as most decentralized exchanges. Uniswap comes to mind on all layer 2s. DAI is basically deployed everywhere in the Ethereum ecosystem, including chains like Avalanche. So where do you use it? I'm only going to highlight two strategies. First is the more conservative strategy that I've highlighted in my other USDC and BUSD videos, which is just depositing it on Aave or Compound and earning a consistent 1 to 2% per year, which is nothing to write home about, but is a stable interest rate denominated in USD. You are still losing to inflation in that world, but you're not losing all your money like investing in Anchor. Another strategy which is being incentivized directly by the MakerDAO, which is contributing to the DAI USDC Uniswap pool. If you deposit your DAI and USDC onto Uniswap and get the Uniswap LP tokens from that pool, then you can gain rewards denominated in DAI that are coming as an incentive from the MakerDAO Foundation itself. You can see here that the 7-day net APY is generating 8.94%, 21% over 90 days, which actually does make it beat inflation and is a pretty good thing. Now, this won't last forever because it's an active incentive program, but it is certainly something to think about. So let's wrap this all up by talking about risks. And I'm going to talk about the same risks that I talk about in my USDC and BUSD video while adding one more, which is smart contract risk. See, USDC and BUSD are centralized institutions, and they have custodial banks holding funds, which means that the problems that they're dealing with are very different than this automated system, which is the MakerDAO. The Vault smart contracts, the Oracle smart contracts, and the auction smart contracts could all have bugs in it. Now, where do I see this risk? I see it as moderately low. The system has been functioning for many years now. Likely all the bugs that are in it have already been found, but there's always an outside risk that something missed someone's eye or that eventually there's another bug that's introduced through the merge or something like that. So smart contract risk is something to consider, but in a big project that is pretty central to the entire DeFi ecosystem, it would be hard to imagine finding a truly system-breaking bug at this point. So although it is something to consider and be mindful of, I do not see the risk as being incredibly high. So let's move on to regulatory risk. I also see this as moderately low. Not as low as with USDC, but certainly better than Tether. DAI has been moving to more fully integrate with the traditional financial system and to be a little bit more centrally planned. They retain a lot of the permissionless aspects of a decentralized system, so they can't actually blacklist people from using DAI, which may be something that regulators are not too happy about. But they're trying to integrate the system with the traditional financial system and gain a lot of the benefits that come from holding custodial accounts. They're looking to work with regulators as opposed to subvert them, which may be good, but it also may be a strategic mistake in that regulators will much prefer a system where they can actively censor people to one that is permissionless. And so all this move towards centralization may ultimately just be folly and may be playing into the hands of the centralized regulators that are hoping to kill the system in general. I think the probability of that is moderately low, but not zero. Next, let's talk about depeg risk. Now, because it is a collateralized stablecoin rather than a purely algorithmic stablecoin, the scenarios by which it depegs from a dollar look an awful lot like the scenarios under which USDC or Tether or BUSD would depeg, rather than a system like Luna that actually doesn't have any collateral backing it. In fact, I see the depeg risk as being even lower than USDC and BUSD, if for no other reason than they're not engaging in monthly attestations of their assets. All of their assets are on-chain, at least for now, until they start integrating, traditional financial institutions and bank accounts. But even then, there will likely be full financial audits because DAI is such a transparent system. It's transparent and auditable by nature, which actually gives me a lot more trust in it than I have for USDC, even though I have a fair amount of trust for USDC. I don't think they have incentive to lie about it. All I'm saying is USDC could if they wanted to. And in the DAI system, with collateralized on-chain assets, you can't lie about it. It's all public. And there's plenty of data visualization tools for you to go and explore exactly what collateral types there are, exactly what distressed vaults there are. So it's a lot more predictable and a lot less likely that there is a bank run on DAI. And even if there was a bank run on DAI, we know that the money's there. We can see it.
Hey, that's pretty good.
So I see the depeg risk as being quite low, except in the event of one of the other risks happening, which would be something like smart contract risk or regulatory risk. If the regulators come down on it and say that it's illegal to use, it's certainly possible that it could depeg. I mean, even then it would probably just sell off a lot of the collateral and people would just stop using it. And then of course, in the event of a smart contract exploit where someone were able to drain a lot of the collateral from the system, creating bad debt within the system, that's another scenario by which I could see it depeg. But again, not as the result of a bank run and not as a result of it being under collateralized. Finally, let's talk about centralization risk. Like I've said a couple of times in this video, DAI is making a move towards centralization. They're retaining a lot of the permissionlessness, which will mean that it probably can't blacklist people. And I'm gonna get more into this in my next video, but the CEO, Rune Christensen, has been moving towards a central hierarchical model for many years now, framing the discussion in terms of red-pilled and blue-pilled, and whether or not they wanna move towards integrating with the traditional financial system rather than subverting it. I see the centralization risk as not as high as USDC, but certainly higher than something like RAI, which is a stablecoin that's trying to minimize the amount of governance control that people can exert over it. If decentralization is a continuum, and centralization is over here, and decentralization is over here, then over here you'd have things like USDC and BUSD and Tether. And then over here you'd have things like RAI and Frax and Fei, and then somewhere in the middle would be DAI. The first of the decentralized stablecoins, neither truly decentralized nor truly centralized, but somewhere in the middle. So the risk of centralization to me is, again, moderate. If what you're wondering is DAI safe? I'd say, yeah, pretty safe. I'm not a financial advisor, but given all the reasons that I just talked about, it's a pretty safe place to put your money if you want it to remain in crypto and you want it to remain stable versus the dollar. It's also widely accepted in a lot of different DeFi applications, maybe even starting the whole DeFi Summer. So there's a lot of places to earn using DAI and a lot of ways to leverage DAI to allow you to go long on other cryptocurrencies. I wouldn't say it's my favorite stablecoin, but it's certainly in my top 3. So please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you'll be notified in my next video where I'm gonna go deep into the drama of the MakerDAO and the fight for its soul. See ya.